welcome everybody to this webinar with Be Slavery Free and the Fair Trade Association of Australia and New Zealand. And we are just so proud to be able to share this webinar together. We have been running webinars, I think, almost one a week for the last 4 or 5 months, and have had numerous people come through. And tonight is particularly good because a lot of the ones that we have been running is for industry and people who are in the business world. And tonight is particularly for consumers and people in civil society. And it's great to have you all here. To start off, we want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people, which is where we are. And we give respect to all First Nation people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also in Australia, and to anybody else who might be coming into this webinar from around the world. And so we give respect to the elders and leaders past and present, and those who are emerging as well. It is so important that we acknowledge the realities that we work in. When we come to this area of slavery, unless we're working in reality, we are never going to stop slavery. And we want people to be slavery free. And so tonight, the two presenters that we have, besides Carolyn and myself, and Carolyn is my co-director, who's also happens to be my best friend, also happens to be the person I'm married to. And so we are the national co-directors of Be Slavery Free. And we have Nimiti Zapat, who's the chair of the Fair Trade Association Australia New Zealand. And we also have Kim Good, who's going to be sharing also, and she runs a fair trade shop stall business. And so it's great to have people who are involved and who are doing it as well. We will be recording tonight, and at the end we'll put up the information about further webinars. Now this will be available, and so you will be sent out a feedback form, and on that we'll have the URL for the recording of this webinar as well. And so it's great to be able to share this with you and to understand the things that we might pick up and know, and particularly on this area of how does fair trade really become a way of really affecting modern slavery. And it does. And I hope by the end of this seminar, you will know that too, and even more so that you'll take action to do something about what you've learned from the webinar this evening. Q&A. We are also having a Q&A, and as was on the first slide, if you've come on just recently, there's a chat box down the bottom, and if you would like to introduce yourself on the chat box, and if you go across from the chat box down the bottom, you'll see Q&A. If you have any questions, and the last part will be for you to ask questions, please put your questions, and you can do that as we go along through the webinar as well. But put your questions in there in the Q&A box. You click on that, it comes up, you write it in, it comes up, and some questions might be able to be answered really quickly as we go through, even to save time for perhaps more complicated questions at the end of that. So we hope this is going to be a good one. So let's start off, and we will share screen again and go into to Nimiti's the presentation that she has there. So let's move into that one.
Hi everyone, great to be here today to talk to you about fair trade as an antidote to modern slavery. I think it's nice to think of a positive thing that you can do to really help to ensure people are not vulnerable to that. So a little bit about what is fair trade and how can it help. So fair trade is all about empowering disadvantaged people in developing countries. So it's about providing them with a sustainable livelihood through regular income, good working conditions, and direct access to market for their goods. And this enables us to alleviate poverty amongst the people that produce products, and also not just at an individual level, but with families and communities through sustainable ongoing fair trade practice. I think this quote really sums up the fair trade movement really nicely and succinctly. If you give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. I think that's a really great way of describing what fair trade does. What we're about is supporting people for a lifetime, giving them the skills they need so that they can build their own businesses and build their own livelihoods over time. And it really is also about respecting people, the skills that they have, and enabling them to use those skills in a way that's really positive for them and their communities. So how does that actually impact our ability to ensure that people are not vulnerable to exploitation and vulnerable to trafficking? Well, if you're living in poverty, you are vulnerable. We all know that. And when people are struggling to survive, if they don't have enough money to live well, they're far more vulnerable. Somebody coming up to them and giving them an offer of employment. And if you provide people with a secure income where they live within their communities that enable them to live comfortably, they are far less likely to take up an offer to go and work somewhere away from their families, away from their communities, where they can possibly be vulnerable to trafficking, to slavery, and to other forms of exploitation. So the fair trade movement is underpinned by 10 principles, and these are the 10 principles of fair trade. So the 10 principles of fair trade are put out there by the World Fair Trade Organization, and they underpin the whole global movement of fair trade. And organisations like the one that I'm a part of, the Fair Trade Association of Australia and New Zealand, actually, I help businesses who want to work within the fair trade movement and help them to work towards and, in fact, fulfil all of the principles of fair trade in the way that they do business. So what I just wanted to do was take you through in a little bit more detail each of the principles and tell you a little bit more about them so that you can understand what they're about and how they actually help us to provide that antidote to exploitation and slavery. So principle number 1, opportunities for disadvantaged producers. So this is something that really sets fair trade apart from other movements. Fair trade is very specifically working with disadvantaged producers in developing countries for the most part. So what we mean by that is imagine that you've got somebody living in India making a beautiful hand block printed tablecloth. That might be something that someone in Australia would be very happy to pay well for and would love to have. But how does that small artisan working in India connect with the market in Australia? And that's where the fair trade movement can come in and provide opportunities for those disadvantaged producers of goods. Principle 2 is about transparency and accountability. So we all know that there are businesses out there that make claims that can sometimes you sort of think, oh, is that really real? Are they really doing that? So transparency and accountability is really important. And it can sometimes feel a little counterintuitive for retailers, especially if they've used to working in a traditional competitive retail environment where people often hold their cards pretty close to their chest in terms of who their suppliers are, because they're concerned that if they share their supplier information, that they'll be open to competition. So we work very closely with businesses to give them the comfort that they can be transparent and provide that accountability, and that it's still good business practice. So we're essentially working with businesses to ensure that they do what they say that they do. Yeah. Fair trade practices. So this is a general one that sort of talks about ensuring that you're working in a way that is positive for all the people that you're involved within your business. So you care about their socio and economic well-being, you care about their physical and emotional well-being, that you're working in a positive way within those fair trade practices across your whole business. Fair payment. So this is a really key one. So if we think again about an artisan, maybe somebody in Uganda that's making a hand-woven basket that might take them a half a day to make or a day to make, and that may be a skill that has taken them years to develop, that they've learned, maybe passed on from generation to generation. They should be paid fairly for that work. So it's not just about paying somebody a minimum wage. It's about paying them fairly for the skill and for the time that's put into what they're making. And it's also about ensuring that we're paying them a living wage. So this isn't about giving them extra money to go out and buy Lamborghinis. This is about ensuring that they have enough money to buy food, to have a roof over their head, to have clothing. These are very basic things, and to ensure that they can live comfortably in the environment and the community that they're living in. So fair payment is a really key one. Principle number 5, you probably noticed that one sitting there, is very directly talking to no slavery. So we're talking about no child labour, no forced labour should be happening. One of the things that I really like about the fair trade movement is that it works with communities and with businesses to get them to a place where they can adhere to all of these principles. So one of the things, for example, when we talk about child labour, in disadvantaged communities, it's very, very common for children to work within a family business, whether that be on the farm or helping mum and dad to make whatever it is they make. And that can just be a part of what's normal for them. So educating communities to understand that actually, if you're able to enable those children to go to school and to be educated, that benefits the family and it benefits the whole community, is something that can be really positive for the community, and that can take a little bit of time for that to happen. And certainly, absolutely no forced labour should ever be happening. So no discrimination, gender equity and freedom of association is Principle 6. A really great part of the fair trade movement globally is that over 50% of all of the fair trade enterprises' senior leadership is women, and over 70% of the people involved in fair trade enterprises are women, which is really fantastic. So we know already globally that if you educate girls, that it has a really strong flow-on effect to their communities. So ensuring that women are involved in these programs directly is really fantastic. The sorts of things that happen are working with women to be flexible around their childcare arrangements. Maybe they can bring their children along, they sit under the tree in the shade, they connect together and they make baskets, for example. Principle 7, good working conditions. So this is a really important principle in regards to ensuring that people in our fair trade enterprises are working in a safe and comfortable way. So this is something that we take for granted in Australia. We're used to, if we go to work, although many of us might be working from home now, but if you are going to work, you expect that place to be comfortable and safe, and you don't even think about that. So again, this is a really strong education piece. It usually starts with safe practices. So, if you're working with things that might flick in your eye, understanding you might need to wear a face cover, safety equipment on your hands, not working with toxic materials, and then the actual environment itself. So are we in the hot sun? Are there sharp things lying around? Are we going to trip over? All those normal sort of things. Capacity building. So one of the great things about fair trade is it's not just a once-off transaction. The aim is that we're working in long-term relationships with the people that we work with, so that we can actually build capacity in those businesses and those communities ongoing. Principle 9, promote fair trade. It's actually really important because if people don't understand fair trade or know what it is, it doesn't matter what good work you're doing out there. So it is a really important thing for us to talk about what fair trade is and how people can support it. And principle 10 is certainly not the least one. A lot of people don't realise that respect for the environment is a key principle of fair trade movement as well. So we often work very closely with producers to ensure that they are working in an environmentally friendly way. So this might be, again, not using toxic materials, where they source the material from, trying to avoid things like disposable plastics, all of those things, and ensuring that we're working in a positive way that's positive for the environment. So the fair trade movement has a really big positive impact globally. These statistics were taken in a snapshot in 2018 by the World Fair Trade Organization, and that's lives impacted at that point in time being impacted. And as you can see there, 355 fair trade enterprises listed with the World Fair Trade Organization. There are many more businesses out there that are working towards certification that are working with these 355 organizations. For example, businesses here in Australia that are selling their goods. And 54% of senior roles in these organizations are held by women, which is fantastic. So I'm going to finish there by just saying that you can have an impact today. If you're having that feeling that you're wanting to do something, you want to do something positive. Well, when you're starting to think about your Christmas shopping, if you go online and you buy something that is a beautiful fair trade item for someone, you know that that fair trade item is having a direct positive impact on the person that made it, which is a fantastic thing. So thank you.
And it's really good to be able to hear those things and to see them go through. So what we want to do now is to give a perspective from Be Slavery Free. We're a coalition and we work together with so many other groups in both business, in government and in civil society to stop and to abolish and to prevent modern slavery. So let's have a look at what we see are the things which the Fair Trade Association can really play a key role and their workers.
So first of all, we wanted to just tell you what modern slavery is. The definition of modern slavery, we believe it's really important to get the definitions right and not to engage in what we talk about as definition creep, because it can be that not everybody who's in a bad working situation is a slave, and not every child who is working is in child labour. They could be helping out around the home, for example, as Nimiti said. So what is modern slavery? Well, there's some components that are in this that are really important. Number one, they're taken against their will. Now, that might be that they're tricked. It might be that they are coerced. It might be that they are offered something that just sounds too good to be true and feel as though they must take it because they have no other option. Their freedom is taken away. So whereas many people might think of slavery as involving chains, often the chains are psychological. They're threatened that they know where their families are, they'll harm their families, they'll take them to law enforcement. And in many situations, sometimes children or people who've been trafficked don't actually know where they are. They don't know what country they're in, and they wouldn't know how to get away. They're told that there's things that will harm them if they do. So they can't leave. Often their identity papers, but not always, are taken. They get little or no money. And the third big component of this is they work for the gain of those who entrap them. They don't get the benefit of their work, somebody else does.
One of the other areas that is one of the 10 points that Nimiti was talking about is respect for the environment. And more we are seeing that the attitudes towards destruction of the environment and slavery come from the same mindset. And so what we are starting to see is that not just the respect, but for looking at issues on the environment, global warming, etc., are absolutely key because they affect slavery. let me tell you a story. I met Tree at a conference that we were at together in Bangkok. He came from Myanmar. He came from a rice farming family, and because of the climate change, the conditions were changing in Myanmar, and they were not able to produce the amount of rice they needed to stay alive. Being farmers, they understood these things. They had been for a generation been rice farmers, and found out that they were going to starve. And so they got together, an extended family, and realized the only way to try and make through and work out how they're going to change their patterns and their farming was if they sent someone across to Thailand to get a job, to get some money to send it back home. They raised all the money they could. He went across to Thailand, was greeted on the Thai side, handed over from the labor agent from Myanmar that they had paid $1,000 to, and was going to pay another $1,000 as he was going to work. The person on the other side said, you owe me $2,000. He said, oh, no, we paid $1,000 to the agent, the other side in Myanmar, and we're going to pay off the $1,000. He said, no, that was to him. You owe me $2,000. He said, well, I haven't got $2,000. He said, well, I've got your papers. You're going to have to go into any job that I put you into. Put him on a fishing boat. You're going to be out for a while. He thought that might mean weeks or maybe months. He never walked on land for 17 years. And so what was causing the vulnerability of the family and putting a person into that vulnerable situation was because of the environmental degradation that was happening. And that's happening in all sorts of areas where we're finding that the grab for farming land is destroying the environment, destroying forest lands, etc. In the cocoa area we work in Cote d'Ivoire, in the last 20 years, we have seen 82% of the forest land in Cote d'Ivoire being destroyed for putting in cocoa farms.
So poverty is the key driver of most slavery in the world. And people who often become entrapped in slavery become entrapped because of their vulnerability, but also of their desire for a better life. We often say the trade is in people, but the currency is their hopes. It's about somebody being offered something that seems too good to be true, for a future for their children, for their family. It might be education, it might be money, it might be healthcare. It might just be an opportunity to have a job that will give them a leg up. And so people who are absolutely desperate are most likely to be trapped in slavery. Also, the people who are most likely, the very desperate people who get trapped, are often the entrepreneurs and the initiators who are prepared to say, I want to get out of this. And so they're actually perfect candidates for starting up a fair trade business if they get the right kind of help. So fair trade helps with fair trade practices, opportunities for disadvantaged producers, and fair trade payments. And all of these contribute to alleviating poverty.
No child labour and no forced labour is a no-brainer. Almost half of the people trapped in slavery in the world are young people or children. 29% of slavery is from forced labour. And so these two principles in fair trade is really, really important ones to make sure that, yep, children can help around as children do, and it's really good to be able to teach them good practices and living skills, etc., but not something that's going to take away their education, not something that's going to affect their health, not something that's going to take away their childhood. And so child labour has been a major, major problem in many of the areas of slavery, and forced labour is one of the big areas where people get trapped, often because of a debt, and often it's because of, again, their poverty and not knowing what interest is, for instance. And so they get trapped. And that becomes a really important one for people to include as a part of their enterprises.
Traceability and transparency are two of the things that we ask of all business. Now, it used to be that many businesses didn't know where their supplies came from and their products came from. And it used to be that businesses would say, if we tell you who our suppliers are, then somebody will steal our ideas or steal our patents. And they used to talk about it as commercial in confidence. And so they wouldn't publish supplier lists. They wouldn't let people know where it had come from. We've managed to make a big shift in that, and I know that the Fair Trade Association is part of that shift as well, to say, no, actually, the world isn't going to end if you tell somebody where you're sourcing something from. People don't usually steal those kinds of ideas. So traceability, knowing your supply chain, unlocks the unknown. And it's always the unknown. It's the hidden bits of a supply chain that can hide slavery. And transparency is the basis for making the invisible visible. So if importers make clear where their products are coming from, then we know that they are more likely to have integrity. It means that people can check. It means that if something is happening in a supply chain, that there's more likelihood that people will be able to talk about that and will be able to address it.
The other wonderful thing of traceability and transparency is you actually get to know something of the person generally that has been making those goods. And so a relationship is formed, and it really does make a major, major difference. So what's the story? How do we understand these things? Most times we learn so much through stories. And Kim Good is a person who runs a fair trade business, and she's going to tell us a bit about the stories and that sort of relationship and that sort of connection.
Hello, my name is Kim Good, and I own a fair trade business, Import Ants, that wholesales eco-mix brushes produced by women in Sri Lanka. It's easy to think that slavery is an old-fashioned thing. It doesn't happen now, and for the comfort of our own homes, the concept feels worlds away. My first encounter with modern slavery was in Sri Lanka. In a small village on a strip of land that's sandwiched between the sea on one side and the lagoon on the other, I met Indira. She told me about Downy, a young woman who had married a young man in the local village. The couple lived with the husband's family, and Downy was expected to find some employment to provide additional income before she had children. As the village's main employment was fishing and no other suitable work was available for a young woman, her mother-in-law coerced Diane into taking a job overseas as a domestic. She was told she would work as a housekeeper. Other women from the village had worked overseas as domestics, and the money she would earn would secure her and her husband's future. Although reluctant to leave the village, with limited education and feeling pressure from the in-laws, she agreed. Unfortunately, the job was not what Diane was expecting. On arrival, her employees took her passport and she was confined to the house. She slept on the floor in the kitchen, was given very little to eat, and was physically punished if she took food. Diane was expected to work at all times of the day and night, always on call. Her employee was verbally and physically abusive. She never left the house. She never saw a doctor. She was never paid. Diane was alone in a foreign country with no friends or family, no local language, and no real understanding of where she was in the country, and no way to get home. And one day she just disappeared. We only know of her story because she had met Indira. Sri Lanka is a country of extremes, and the beauty of the little village nestled between the sea and the lagoon attracted wealthy people who built houses and hotels along it. Indira is Sri Lankan and is one of the privileged who live there. She with her husband have a boutique hotel on the lagoon, and she employed some of the women from the local village. She met Diane when she would pick up her friend after work. When she told Indira that she was going to work overseas, and Indira was worried for her. She tried to talk her out of it, but Diane's mother-in-law was insistent, and she felt she had no other options. Indira gave her phone number to ring if she ever needed it, and as things worsened, Diane managed to ring her when her employer had left her locked inside in the house. Indira reported Diane's abuse to the Sri Lankan government and tried to have them take action, but to no avail, even after repeated attempts. So when Diane stopped ringing, Indira feared for the worst. To this day, Diane has not been heard of and nobody has taken responsibility for her disappearance. Indira knew of others that had had bad experiences working overseas and wanted to help the local women to have a better option within the village. And this is where fair trade makes a difference. Indira started a group called Fibre. In a purpose-built factory, she now takes in women, local women, provides them with training and sustainable employment. They create beautiful handmade and painted homewares that are used in the hotel. Wall hangings, linen and art. By using the hotel to showcase and sell their work, overseas visitors see the beauty and value of these goods. And it elevates them from being mere handicrafts, enabling them to attract a fair price. The women now have a secure employment and are less likely to be coerced into slavery. Financial independence allows them to be strong, self-reliant directors of their own destiny. Fibre artwork now attracts commissions from other hotels. Fair trade is not charity. It's a business model that at its best provides secure and meaningful work for the most vulnerable in our societies. It provides a living wage that allows employees to thrive and grow and to support themselves and their families and their community. It bridges the gap between the haves and the have-nots and removes the financial vulnerability that enables those with more power to exploit those with less. Trade, by its very nature of buying at a lower price and selling at a higher price, encourages exploitation of the least powerful in the negotiation. It doesn't matter whether you're selling your labour or a commodity. Those with less power are at a disadvantage. Fair trade seeks to address this imbalance. You might think that Diane's experience happened in another country, not in Australia. But Australia is not immune to modern slavery. It is a destination for trafficked people like Diane. Her experience could equally have happened here as in any other country. Every time you buy or sell something, you are conducting trade. And all of us consumers are both the problem and the solution. We all have a power and choices, and our choices can make a difference by opting for ethical, transparent supply chains, by selecting fair trade over other options, by asking who made our clothes, food, homewares, telephones, and all the other things that we buy. You are exercising your power and giving voice to women like Diane. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. It's those sort of stories which wake these things up and grow our compassion and our empathy and helps make choices in the things that we buy, which really can make a difference. So down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button there. There are a couple of questions that have come in, and so we'll move towards those. And we want to have a chance to look at these and to answer those. So we will take as off here. And my apologies, Nimity, for the little technical hitch beforehand there. But some things they heard twice, so hopefully they'll impact even more.
Great. So the questions are about sound. So if there's any other questions, we'd love to hear them. But Kim, can you just tell us a little bit more? You'll need to take yourself off mute. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own business and when you started it, you know, what you sell? I just think what you sell is fabulous. So it'd be great to tell other people about it.
Well, I started...
You're on mute, Kim, I think.
No, it's not.
She's
mute.
not.
No.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Is there sound happening?
I can hear you, Kim. I think you're fine. Yeah.
Is that good? Well, I started with elephant dung paper in Sri Lanka, and then discovered our.
You've just muted her, Buzz. Can you unmute her?
No, we're not hearing you at all there, Kim.
This was working perfectly before, by the way, folks. Kim, your microphone is showing us off. Is that?
Okay, we're good now.
Is that good?
Yes.
Mm,
Yep, I can hear you.
no.
Yep.
Hear me?
Yes.
Keep on that. Nimbity, can you talk just so we check if you're coming through?
Yes, I can hear Kim. And
No.
I think other
No,
people
can't do that either.
as well.
This
I think
is,
Oh, everybody else can hear them.
but everyone else can hear them. Okay,
Well, good.
that's an interesting
great.
one we've never quite had before.
We're just going to leave you in the dark.
Excellent. We're glad we can hear you. Or everybody else can hear you. Okay, that's great. We have no idea why. But if everybody else can, that's great.
Really good.
Nimity, there's a couple of other questions coming in. Nimity, tell us a bit about how people could procure fair trade products.
Yeah, sorry. Kim, did you finish telling us about your business? Did you want to finish that off first?
That's all right. Well, actually, now what I do is natural fibre brushes. And so the group that we work with employs mainly women, and a lot of the women came from the local slum originally. Over time, we've been able to help these women to move from what was quite bad housing, where often they were inundated by water, into housing, newer housing in higher ground. We've been able to implement things like they now have a creche at the the factory, so that the women then know that their children are being safely looked after before school, after school, or school holidays, and for the youngest of their children to be able to come in and be looked after while they're working. This has really helped the women because some of the women were single parents and they didn't have good family networks that were able to look after the children, and it left them at a big disadvantage not being able to work simply because they couldn't, without having, being worried about their children. So we've done things like that. We've implemented things like the women's wages go directly into a bank account, that the women have their own card that they can access. This has stopped other family members being able to take the money from the women when they first arrive back after, their weekly pay. The brushes we make, they're all natural fibres. So for us, the environmental factors are very important, and we look really closely at the materials that are used, and even things as the glues, how they're washed, any waste products, to make sure that they're not polluting the environment, because we're in a small village and the waterways surrounding us, they are, part of the village. And by polluting them, you're only causing problems to the people living there. And too often, factories and things can be, neglect that side of things, because for them it doesn't matter. They can always move to a new space.
Yes.
But we're very much a part of the community and the village there. So it's important that we sort of make sure that all elements are looked after, including, the environmental factors around the village as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, cool. Well, just to answer the question that came up in regards to how to procure fair trade. So I mean, basically, you just need to find somewhere that's stocking fair trade items and buy them, essentially. So, I mean, if you're talking about tea and coffee and chocolate that you might be familiar with, you can often find those in the supermarket. But in terms of artisan-made fair trade items like the brushes that Kim's talking about, or the thimble work, the artwork that she was talking about, the cards and so forth, on the Fair Trade Association website, we have listed our Fair Traders of Australia, who are the certified by us to be fully following the principles of fair trade. And so you can go there and find them. And also to people that are certified with the WFTO World Fair Trade WFTO guarantee, you'll also see that logo on some items as well. So keep your eye out for that. And as well as markets, there's a bunch of online markets happening at this time of year, online this year because of COVID, and normally in person. There's a few in-person ones happening. So really there's lots and lots of ways that you can find fair trade items and buy them. Yeah.
Another question's come in, and you've partly answered that, Nimity, in that some chocolate manufacturers have their own certification. Lindt has a farmers program. Is that very different from fair trade? Is there a artisan development program that you have?
So there's two types. I'd say there's two basic types of fair trade, if you like. So there's a fair trade label that can be provided to commodity items like chocolate, tea, coffee. And that has some very specific criteria, and it's more suitable to something that's the same every time you buy it and is sold in volume. And the other certification that I just mentioned, the WFTO, it's the World Fair Trade Organization guarantee, fits items that don't fit into that more specific type of fair trade. So things that in a more broader context are coming from businesses that work under those 10 principles and have been verified by a third party. But in answer to the question, is there a difference? So I don't know the specific program that Lindt have running, so I can't comment on that specifically. But what I can say is that the key difference with fair trade is that it's third party verified. So if there's a fair trade certification, it's not just us putting up our hand or a business putting up their hand saying I'm ethical or I'm doing the right thing. They actually have the ability to become certified either with fair trade labelling or with WFTO guarantee, or if they're an Australian business like Kim's business that's sourcing fair trade goods from overseas, Australian businesses can become certified as a fair trader of Australia. And that's the key difference between fair trade and all of the other sort of terms out there, is that we have that third party verification. Yeah.
All of the research that's coming through in marketing and what people want to give, particularly in presents for things like, you know, birthdays and Christmas, etc., is a relationship with the products which are being given. So with Fair Trade Association and with the goods that come in, is there a way for people to actually know the story about the people who have produced those goods?
Yeah, so it really depends on the business how much of that they can share, depending. But a lot of fair trade businesses try and even put, you know, if it's a handmade item. So what I'm wearing here, for example, was made by a fair trade business in India. And when I received this, there was a label, you know, with the story of this item. And in some cases, the name of the person that's even made it might be handwritten on the label with some bespoke items. Kim, did you want to maybe talk to how you share the story of your things? Yeah.
Because I actually wholesale rather than directly sell, I sell to retailers. So I actually put my story up on my website. There you can do links back to all the different groups that I deal with and that I work with, and stories of some of the individuals from the group. And we do newsletters that we send out to our retailers, but also other people can sign up to get our newsletters. And in that, we've done updates, like over COVID, we did an update about what was happening with our women in Sri Lanka and the factory there. And, you know, to saying how the women were actually paid throughout the month that they were in lockdown in Sri Lanka. All of the women got their wages, which is an amazing thing, because normally they would be very, you know, totally unable to earn any other money and get any money in lockdown, and the government isn't providing them with anything else either. So it can cause enormous hardships. So we do that. That's how we sort of put our story out there. And of course, we do it on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Yeah. Lots of social media stories. Yeah.
Lots of social media.
Yeah. And actually, that's one of the really wonderful things these days, is that you can actually connect directly sometimes with the suppliers on social media as well. So, you know, sometimes they themselves will share their own stories directly, and we'll pass those on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. One of the questions that comes through, and we've heard this a number of times, is, but what about the quality of the objects which are being produced in this? What would you say to that?
Well, yeah, I'm sure Kim has some good stories on that. So this is one of the things where the partnership between a business in Australia and the supplier of people making the goods is so important, because that's really about working with those businesses to help them develop their product to a marketable quality. That's part of what we work with them on. Did you want to talk about that, Kim? Because that's been a big part of what
it's actually, it's that whole idea of capacity building, which is one of the fair trade principles. So what you're doing is you're actually teaching these people how to elevate and raise the level and the standard of their goods so that they can compete on the world market and for the markets that they're going to. So that's a really important element. And I believe, like, to make fair trade sustainable, you have to have quality goods that do compete equally as well with any other good in the market.
Yeah, and I think that's where it is. As Kim said, this isn't a charity model; it's a trade model. And if the good isn't of enough quality for it to be sold, it'll get sent back to the suppliers, and they'll be guided for the most part to say, look, this isn't a saleable item. We need to and train them over time. And then I guess what I would say, I was just chatting with another fair trader earlier today, and that's been involved in fair trade for a couple of decades. And one of the things we were chatting about is how far fair trade has come in that time. So a lot of businesses in Australia and other wealthier countries that work with suppliers will do things like help them with the design and the look and feel of an item so that it is saleable, and develop collections and lines of design, and then help them to be able to make product to spec as well. So yeah, there's some beautiful quality items out there now, which is fantastic.
Well, to finish off, it'd be really good to hear a story about how a Fair Trade Association artisan has had their life change because of the relationships and the way that you'll be able to work with them.
Yeah. Did you want to talk to that, Kim, or do you want me to?
Well, I mean, one of with our brush makers, I mean, the person I was talking about earlier was from Thimble, another group that I deal with. But with our brush makers, where they were once living in an area that flooded repeatedly throughout the year, so much so that the women used to be moved into the factory with their children and chooks and dogs and, the whole bit. So fair trade has enabled them. There's been money put aside, and so that as land became available, they've been able to move from what it was essentially a swamp into higher land where they can now live properly and not be constantly worried about all their possessions being, washed away in in rain, which of course is only become worse with climate change. So,
and not to mention all the waterborne diseases that they are.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yes, the waterborne diseases and the mosquitoes, the whole bit, Yeah. And I've seen it. I've been there during the rainy time where the women were there and having to move into the factory. They've got an area where they would take them in. And of course they all got the flu. They all got bugs. They all got sick, And then the children, it's an ongoing thing. So yeah, that's been a huge difference to the women.
Right.
And health is a major problem, of course, with people who are living in poverty, because it not only affects their work capacity, but often it has caused family to go, oh my goodness, to get any health care, we've got to go and make ourselves vulnerable to get the work to pay for the medical expenses for that. And we have seen that and experienced that in the communities that we've worked in over the years around the world. And health is a major factor to poverty and to vulnerability, which leads to people getting into slavery. Nimini and Kim, thank you so much. It's been great to work together on this, and hopefully the people have got a much clearer idea. And if people want to buy Christmas goods,
they can go to my website and find, I've got stockists all over Australia and New Zealand.
tell us the website, and it'll come on the final screen. People will have it there as well. But it's good to hear it from people who are doing it.
Yeah, and we've also put out a shopping guide, a fair trade shopping guide for Christmas. So keep your eye out for that as well. We're sharing it on social quite a bit. So
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And we will bring up this final slide so you can see what is coming up. And it will hopefully give us some good understandings of what's there. The next one that we have on is actually not for a couple of weeks now, and it's with IOM, the National Organization for Migration, and we'll have on Aditi Wanchu from Adidas. Adidas is actually going down to tier 3 to check back through to the raw materials in making their shoes. And it's been a very interesting journey for Adidas on that. And IOM have been working with her a lot on that. IOM have a program called the CREST program. And so we've named it, we found slavery, what do we do now? So it's looking at remediation and it's looking at that. So some of you might find that interesting. Again, you can register for that on our website, which is down the bottom there. And this Christmas or other gift giving time, or just commodity times that you want to buy goods, then www.fta.org.au. We'll give you that list that Nimity was talking about before. So thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again. And we hope that this has really informed your choices, and your choice really is your voice. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Let's get ready to walk the Bluestones again. Let's curse Punt Road. Let's ride the Frankston line. Let's dodge swooping Maggies. Let's cross the Inglorious River. Let's get ready to chuck hook turns in the rain. Let's order obnoxious coffees. Let's queue for dimmies. Let's avoid outbound on the Tulla. Let's wear the blackest black. Let's Gertrude, let's Bay, let's Burke, let's Hoddle. Let's Melbourne again, an initiative to reinvigorate Melbourne from those who love this city.